Welcome back to our in-person and online audience. We are now going to begin with panel 3, which looks at building long-term partnerships for gender justice. And I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, Mr. Maiwand Rahyab, who's the founder and CEO of Resilient Societies, an emerging Canada-based global organization dedicated to empowering civil society activists and human rights defenders, especially those operating from closed or closing civil spaces or in exile. Before relocating to Canada, Mr. Rahyab held leadership roles with the National Democratic Institute, Counterpart International, and Afghanistan Institute for Civil Society. His insights and expertise have been featured in notable publications, including the Ottawa Citizen, Montreal Gazette, and the Diplomat, where he regularly writes on civil society, democracy, and human rights. Mr. Rahyab is also a Fulbright and Chevening Scholar and Asia Society Fellow, and I'm greatly pleased, having met him on previous occasions, that he's able to join us today. Mr. Rahyab, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Hawan, for hosting us today here, and it's a very timely and relevant event today, and also for a very generous introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. One good thing about doing a panel later in the day is that a lot of sort of scene setting that you have to do is already done by the previous panel, so we all know what we're talking about. But I thought just to start, before I introduce my very distinguished panelists, I thought to highlight a couple of points. The first one is, when we talk about gender justice in Afghanistan, and particularly around partnership on gender justice advocacy in Afghanistan, we need to note and acknowledge that this discussion does not take place in isolation or in a vacuum. We need to look at also at the current state of the world order that's unfortunately rapidly changing, not only with the US changes and the freeze on funding and all the backsliding in democracy and human rights that's happening there, but globally, for the past 15 years or even more, we're seeing an increasing repression of human rights, democracy, civil society, civic space that is being under attack globally. So we're talking about a very critical issue of gender justice in Afghanistan, but we can only have a productive conversation and execution of our activities if we are recognizing what's happening around us. So that's one point I wanted to discuss later with the panelists. Second point is, when we discuss about partnership, particularly around women's rights in Afghanistan, it's important that all the efforts are aligned. There are at least 3 stakeholders that I see. It's the Afghan women inside the country, Afghan women leaders, and others, men as well, in exile, but also the global community. How do we ensure that there's an effective alignment of goals, vision, and strategy and tactics among these 3 key stakeholders is going to be critical. In the meantime, I think we need to also note the dilemma we're facing, which is how do we make sure, so we're in a situation, unfortunately, where we have an important cause that's so critical. We have around 20 million people, women in the country, are being denied of all their rights. But in the meantime, we are seeing that, sometimes it can be risky, super risky endeavor when we are also dealing with this important issue of right, but also be aware of that 20 million people, women, are in the country, and they are subjected to repression. And sometimes our effort, if not done with the right level of prudence, can potentially risk their well-being, their safety. So how do we strike the right balance that we are mitigating our risk as we engage in proactive, serious gender advocacy. And the last point is about Canada. And we're here in Canada. We acknowledge Canada's leadership, particularly in the past few years, on championing the cause of women rights, Afghan women rights. Given that the change in global landscape, particularly on issues of human rights and democracy, what role can Canada play differently going forward to play a convening and a facilitating role in furthering gender advocacy for Afghan women? And I was in an event a few months ago, and then somebody said Canada is still ranked as free country in the Civic Space Monitor. Among very few countries are left now that are still ranked free, but it's important that what we are doing with that freedom. I think Canada is on the right trajectory in terms of championing the rights of Afghan women, but more is expected of Canada given the vacuum that we're seeing, and more Canada can really offer more. So with that introduction, I'm really honored to present to you our distinguished panelists. We have one panelist in person. We have three other colleagues who are online. So I want to introduce all the panelists first, and then we'll start a round of questioning. To my right is Hadeia Amiry. She's a human rights activist and expert in diplomacy, foreign policy, national security, and advocacy. As a former Afghan diplomat, she played a key role in strengthening Afghanistan diplomatic and congressional presence and outreach in Washington, D.C. She has testified before the US Congress on issues of Afghan women's rights. She's a writer and has contributed to journals and papers like the Foreign Affairs, the Independent, and the Diplomat. She holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins universities and has a certificate on foreign affairs and human rights from Harvard University. Online, we have Zarqa Yaftali. She's a peace builder, an advocate for women's and children's rights in Afghanistan. She founded the Women and Children Research and Advocacy Network and has served as executive director of the Women and Children Legal Research Foundation since 2009. She has conducted extensive research and advocacy on women's rights under UN Resolution on 1325. In 2020 and 2022, she briefed the UN Security Council on women's participation in peace talks. In 2019, she was awarded the In Peace Award. She has held key roles in civil society organizations. She's currently researching the impact of Taliban edicts on women's rights. We're also pleased to have our other panelist, Professor Rebecca Cook, is a professor emeritus in the University of Toronto's Faculty of Law. She serves on the editorial board of Human Rights Quarterly. She is a member of the Order of Canada and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Her advocacy work includes briefs on gender equality law of courts, including the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and the apex courts of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and the US. Her writing includes over 200 publications, including Gender Stereotyping and Frontiers of Gender Equality, Transnational Legal Perspectives. We're also honored to, again, Professor Rangita was, I think, introduced earlier today. I'm not gonna go again to introduce you. This morning, we all benefited from her insights and perspective on the issues that we discussed. So I'm gonna start with Hadeia. Hadeia, you have been involved with women human rights defenders, women rights activists inside Afghanistan and also in exile. Given the current repression of Afghan women, what are the urgent priorities for gender justice advocacy today for Afghanistan to improve the situation of Afghan women, and how global partnerships can address the sales challenges that women face in Afghanistan, and also taking into consideration that we are now into sustained, as we know, as we discussed this morning, gender advocacy and gender justice advocacy is not a short-term process. We are in a long fight for these rights. How can we sustain, what kind of partnerships are needed to sustain gender advocacy efforts?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to have this discussion with a full room of very prominent human rights defenders and very fine people. So thank you for coming and hearing from us. Before starting and referring to your question, I guess it's very timely to have those questions, and not just to us, to the people here, I think to the rest of the world to address this question. But today is the 27th of February, and I will just bring a little story. Around this time of the year in Afghanistan, before the collapse and throughout the 20 years, based on the years of work that we had done in Afghanistan, we would start getting ready to celebrate the International Women's Day, to buy gifts for each other, for our colleagues who work with us, and to appreciate their work, to appreciate their presence and their voice. And very unfortunately today, we're not doing that anymore. And I don't understand, and I don't actually get this gravity that what will the women of Afghanistan will do in this month, particularly the month of celebration of women and the International Women's Day. It's a very, very grave reminder that the fight against repression and the fight against Taliban should continue, and we should not give it up, because today it reminds us that more than half of the population of Afghanistan, they're still inside that country. They're being prisoners in their own homes, in their own cities, and in the violence that they're experiencing on a daily basis is not comparable to anything. So with that, let's have a moment of silence for them. We want to encourage them. We want to be there with them, and we want to be a voice for them. And we have to give just this little silence for them, because the month of March will be a silence for them, because they don't have anything to celebrate, and there will be no one, especially inside that country, for them to celebrate their presence or their roles in that society. So just let's give a few seconds of silence for them. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the women of Afghanistan deserve more than this. We deserve, we didn't deserve how we were treated, particularly in 2021, and how we were left behind, and how the world just turned a blind eye towards the people of Afghanistan, particularly the women that they had so many promises given to, especially what we had called the Doha negotiation between the two sides, excluding the government of Afghanistan and excluding the people of Afghanistan to that matter. So referring to your question regarding the partnerships, regarding all the alliances and international community, and especially you mentioned about what could be the role of Canada in between all this chaos and crisis that's happening around the world. I strongly believe that at this very historic junction of the year and time, particularly for every single Afghan woman who are inside or outside Afghanistan, they are watching every single international community, every single country that is part of international community, and every actions that they're taking towards the towards how they treat the people of Afghanistan. One of the biggest examples that we are actually part of my work that we are doing is accountability and documenting all the violences that has started even a little before 2021 and up until now. And one of the things that we always emphasize on recognizing, and we always remind ourselves, is to document what is the violence that are being occurred on the people of Afghanistan, particularly the women. But also we should not forget one important thing, and that is we should document what the rest of the world, what international communities are doing, and how they're treating and how they're implementing the promises that they had once, and they had called us once allies, and they're trying to implement that right now. We see some of the regional countries, some of the countries that they are basically having some sort of relationship and engagements with Taliban, and they call it different names. But at the end of the day, those engagements and those relationships that they have with a terrorist organization, it could have a consequence, and the consequence will not stay just within Afghanistan for the people of Afghanistan or the women of Afghanistan. It eventually will go out of Afghanistan and capture the rest of the world, and it will start from that region. Because if there is a virus in one country, and the very, very pragmatic example is COVID, it wasn't someplace, it took the rest of the world, and Taliban, they are the same virus. They will not stay in one place. They are giving safe haven to the rest of the terrorist organizations. And also another thing that they are doing to the rest of the terrorist organization, they're sending a message to the rest of the terrorist organization around the world that if we capture a government, a country, and we're ruling them by killing them, by torturing them, by controlling them, by threatening them, the rest of the terrorist organizations can do the same thing. And unfortunately, that could happen anytime or anywhere in the world. By partnering, I think the women leaders around the world, I mean, it's obvious that we had to leave Afghanistan post-2021 because it was not something that we wanted to do. It was not something that we wished to do. We had to do something that was needed at that time. And today we have a responsibility, because we're out of Afghanistan, we have a responsibility to be a voice for those women who are inside Afghanistan. They are suffering. That's the fact, that they are suffering more, and they can talk less. So we have to be that voice for them. Now, how we can partner with the other CSOs, I work closely with some of the civil society activists of Iran, that they are also working very hard to address the gender apartheid. And we are a group of Iranian women. We have been working the past couple of years. And one thing, we all worked and talked and had discussions and meetings and meetings with the past administration in the US. And one thing we came up and said that one specific thing as women of Afghanistan and women of Iran we share together is this depression, this dire situation, and this really apartheid that we have been going through, and we are experiencing it now, but unfortunately they are having it in the past 40 years. One thing that we came up as women of Afghanistan, that we don't want to be that. I don't want my children to go after 40 years, after 4 decades, and still to talk about gender apartheid or this situation that they're having. So we're working hard together, and that's one of the partnerships that we're doing. I strongly believe on peoples to peoples diplomacy. I think that notion of having close relationship with the CSOs around the world, with the people of different countries who share the same mentalities with you, is very crucial, because we see that the administrations, they come and go and they change frequently, and they do what pleases them. They're policies changed according to what is better for them. And it's very difficult for us to get a hold of them, because right now, if we in Washington, if we want to talk about the situation of women in Afghanistan, as before, and still we hear something that's and that's very unfortunate, because all the time we hear the women's rights or the human rights is not on their top priority list, because this is, they call it, this is domestic issue. They don't want to interfere. They call it, this is not enough political, that they don't want to touch upon it. But, and this makes the work of activists really, really tough to bring the attention of the world that the human rights, the women's right, everything is political. That should be on the national interest of every country. You want to put it on the national security policies of your country, because if you ban half of the population of a country that you were once very much involved, and you just don't want to talk about them even, and you don't want to, and you want it to call, I mean, I'm very sick to this narrative that they say that we don't want to interfere in the domestic issues of your country, while we all of us, we know that what happened in 20 years and post that was very, very much internally, and they did it, and they and here we are today. But please stop me if I'm going. Okay, sure. And another point that I would like to mention in terms of the issues of partnership and how the Canada can play a role in this. I think Canada has proved for so many years that they had a very good feminist foreign policy, and they were very good partners in the past few years, particularly referring to the women's rights in Afghanistan and how they helped and supported them. I think Canada can take a leadership role at this point, because we see that the US, unfortunately, has been stepping back, and they are busy on some other agendas and issues, because mostly they are referring on a lot of their own domestic issues and economic and trade issues, and kind of forgetting that the role that they promised once to do. So Canada can use this as an opportunity, I feel, and support the women of Afghanistan, particularly the grassroots organizations, both those organizations and both those individuals that they are working in secret in Afghanistan to bring the stories and to bring voices of Afghan women outside, and also these CSOs who are working outside, like Afghan women leaders who are outside, and they're really working very hard to be a teammate and a voice for them. So you can really help and support them and provide resources and also any type of support that they could lead them to help the grassroots inside Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Hadeia. I'm now going to ask a question from Zarqa, a dear friend and colleague for many years. Zarqa, you've worked in Afghanistan in the past, but you're currently also involved in a lot of work on women's rights and children's rights inside Afghanistan, but also in the diaspora. Based on your experience, how aligned are the gender justice efforts that right now taking place globally between the global stakeholders, Afghan women in exile, and Afghan women inside the country? Where do you see the gaps, and what lessons you think we have learned so far that we can use to ensure that our advocacy is more effective going forward?
Thank you so much, Maiwand. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to say good afternoon for all of my fellow panelists. First of all, I want to say thank you from Massey College for their good initiative and very on time and important initiative. At least from the past 1 year, I am the witness of their good work regarding the gender justice in Afghanistan, and also supporting women of Afghanistan in this critical time. Thank you so much, all friends and colleagues. Regarding to your question, Maiwand, I want to come from the positive points first. If we all see during the past 3.5 years, if we see from the August 2021 after fall of Afghanistan, on that time when the efforts for gender justice and also gender apartheid was started in Afghanistan, the term of gender justice and gender apartheid was not familiar for lots of us. For example, when Karima Binoun, she started to work on her report regarding the gender apartheid. It was September 2021 when we had some kind of discussion and interview with Karima Binoun, and I introduced some activists that they were inside of Afghanistan on that time. The term of gender apartheid was not well known for some of us on that time. And it was strange that those activists that they work for a long time in Afghanistan, their field was women's rights and also gender justice. Once that the situation became changed and new things came to Afghanistan, but it was not clear for us what is gender apartheid and from where we should start our fight against gender apartheid in Afghanistan. After this, it was in early 2022. I briefed the Security Council regarding the situation of women in Afghanistan. And at that time, I used the term of gender apartheid. And I asked all member states that they should support Afghanistan women and they should identify gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. To be honest, on that time, the member states, the member of Security Council, and even our international partners, our international allies that they were on that meeting, the term of gender apartheid was not familiar for them. But after the meeting, we had some discussion with some of our international friends, and we talked, and they requested that there is need to work on the issue of gender apartheid. There is need to work to have better understanding from the gender apartheid in Afghanistan for those people that they are inside of Afghanistan and also for those that they are outside of Afghanistan. For those member states that they are member of the UN Sex Committee, and also for those that they are working regarding to gender justice in the world, not just in Afghanistan. From that time until now, if we can see lots of struggles, we can see lots of efforts in the codifying of gender apartheid regarding gender justice in Afghanistan. And of course, it is a good sign. It is a positive improvement that right now we can see lots of civil society organizations, lots of international organizations, lots of member states, and lots of individuals that right now they are working on the issue of gender justice, and they are working together to codify gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. So I think this is some kind of sign that we can see a global alliance between Afghanistan women who are inside of Afghanistan or outside of Afghanistan, and also our international alliance as well. Right now, it is very important for me that we are seeing that some of international organizations, they are budgeting for to support Afghanistan women in their fight against gender apartheid. There is some member states that they are strongly supporting Afghanistan women in their fight against gender apartheid in Afghanistan. So all of them, for me, it is a very important and positive sign, and it could make us hopeful for the future of Afghanistan women, for the future that we can codify gender apartheid as a crime against humanity, and also to bring justice in Afghanistan for those women that they lost and they deprived from all of their basic rights, the rights that there isn't any obstacle, not in Sharia or not in the international convention, that Afghanistan is one of the member of those international convention. But inside of this, there is some gaps as well. There is some problems and challenge as well. As you mentioned, Maiwand, right now I am working on a research. It is about the impact of Taliban edicts on women in Afghanistan. And in this research, we are going to analyze and review all of the edicts that Taliban announced since August 2021, the impact of PV law in the life of Afghanistan women. And it is very important that we identify that whenever they are announcing one edict one decree. It is not just have direct impact to the specific area which was announced. For example, when Taliban announced an edict and they banned the right of work, they banned on December 2022 when they announced an edict and banned the work of women in national and international organizations in Afghanistan. The impact is not just on the work of women in Afghanistan. There is other angles in the life of Afghanistan women that this edict had impact on their life as well. For example, when they banned the right, the work of women in national and international organizations, the violence against women cases is increased in the different families because of the poverty, because those women that they lost their jobs, one of the main cause for violence against women is poverty. Right now, the rate of domestic violence is very increased. The number of child marriage, mental health problems, and also other issues are increased among the women, those women that they lost their jobs. So like this, there is the other edicts. It has a different impact and a different angle of women's life in Afghanistan. But inside of this, another problem from my perspective is lack of coordination and unity among those women that they are inside of Afghanistan and also those women that they are outside of Afghanistan. It's very common. All of us know that in none of the country during the history, we cannot see any country that all women, all people should have some specific viewpoints about some specific values. But unfortunately, for now, it is a problem. But I hope that this lack of coordination among women that they are inside of Afghanistan and also outside of Afghanistan, it got solved, and we can see a strong solidarity among all women that they are inside of Afghanistan and also outside of Afghanistan. But because of these challenges, the good things from my perspective is that right now, the new generation that if they are inside of Afghanistan and if they are outside of Afghanistan, they are in the same minded with those women's rights activists, with those women that they are advocating for women's rights, that they are advocating for codifying of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. And it is also a good sign because there is some similarity, some unity among the new generation and also the senior generation regarding their definition from women's rights, from gender apartheid, and also violation of women's rights in Afghanistan. So these are the good signs, and the gaps that right now we are facing, it is not too much, and I am sure that in the future we can work together closely, and we can provide the opportunity for those women that they are inside of Afghanistan to live in Afghanistan without any fear, without any restriction, and to use from all of their basic rights without any ban.
Thank you so much, Zarqa. Now I'm going to move to Dr. Rangita. If I may pose a question to you. So, we're dealing with the de facto authorities that is extremely repressive and are not accountable to anyone. So, and it's hard to, the kind of tools and levers that would have, we would use conventionally to press or encourage a certain country for issues of human rights does not work in Afghanistan context because, frankly speaking, they don't care in terms of their reputation and their commitments. So in this kind of a context, how the international allies of Afghan women can leverage the existing global mechanisms to advance the case of gender justice in Afghanistan, or what else can be done, what more can be done, what new can be done, like what kind of other mechanism may exist or should be created to advance this cause in this context.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspicacious question. As you said earlier, the world is in crisis, and in addressing long-term partnerships for gender justice to combat impunity and to build survivor-centric international justice, I want to be boundary pushing. I would like to reconstruct the very notion of partnerships through a feminist and human rights prism. We have to center not only Afghan women's voices, but the global South women and men as allies. While we salute the 30-odd countries that have come together on the dispute under Article 29 of the CEDAW, the states from the South must also fulfill the promise of allyship. I spoke earlier in the morning how allyship grew out of international relations and crystallized in the founding of the United Nations. And now I borrow from Justice Jackson, who before the Nuremberg trial said, and I again borrow his words when I say, the Taliban edicts are so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate them from being ignored. So that is a call to action to the countries in the global South. I also want to stress that partnerships must stress that Afghan women or women from the global South do not need saving. If not, we fall into the trap that my colleague, Professor Makau Mutua, has called the savior and savage critique of human rights, which then gets manifested in the saving of non-Western, non-white, subaltern other. Afghan women's pursuit of justice is not part of a Western civilizing project that reinforces the power of elites. It is a universal project of reimagining international justice and asserting the leadership of Afghan women in the process of justice seeking. International law itself has long been criticized as the embodiment and imposition of male values and voices. What this moment has done, because of Afghan women's leadership, is to pry open a space for gender justice, allowing for a radical reconceptualization of international law and the very discourse on human rights. We heard earlier in the morning of the lengthy process leading up to a potential dispute before the ICJ, but we also know that the Afghan women's advocacy has led to the long arm of justice in a way that for the first time, the dispute resolution provision under the CEDAW is now being exercised. We are having this conversation at the cusp of the review of Afghanistan's fourth state party report before the CEDAW committee in June. And the special report will be led by the mission in Geneva, but will bring together the voices of Afghan women, both in country and outside in exile. And this will provide a degree of accountability, not just for Afghan women, but will also provide strict scrutiny of the obligations of multilaterals and the extraterritorial obligations of states, including Canada and including businesses, and those businesses in trade relations with the de facto. At its 46th session last May, the Human Rights Council's working group on the Universal Periodic Review examined stakeholder submissions on the Afghanistan report to the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And it was a summary of 30 stakeholder submissions. And the CEDAW's review in June will have even more import than the Universal Periodic Report last May, and will indeed be a watershed moment in recognizing the grave violations of all 16 substantive rights enshrined in the CEDAW. For this afternoon's conversation, I will highlight two cardinal rights. We heard earlier in the morning by Global Canada that restriction of movement, which comes under CEDAW's Articles 1 and 2, but also under the ICCPR, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, Articles 12 and 22. And moreover, the crackdown on women human rights defenders is not only a violation of the right to free speech, freedom of association and assembly, which also runs the risk of arbitrary arrest, detention, and prosecution, which are all threats to the right to liberty under both the CEDAW and the ICCPR. For the purpose of this conversation, I will focus on the right to education, because Afghanistan stands out as the only country in the world where secondary and higher education is strictly forbidden to girls and women. The right to education demands a definition, And I look at the way in which the UNESCO defines education. And UNESCO's definition is profound because it looks at the process of the passing down of knowledge, skills, and values across generations. So that intergenerational role of education is not only profound, but we are also looking at the victims of the violation of the rights to education as still undefined. The harm to generations to come needs to be addressed in any court of justice. The ICSCR, the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, includes the right to education without discrimination of any kind. And so does the CEDAW's Article 10 on women's and girls' education, which spells out both an affirmative and negative right. State parties must work to remove all structures that impede the outcomes for women and girls' education that are discriminatory. But moreover, there's an affirmative right to lifelong learning at all levels that's enshrined in the CEDAW. In my final analysis, I look at the ways in which educational institutions themselves are symbols of the emancipatory power of the human spirit. Educational institutions are crucibles of civic education, where future citizens and leaders of a nation learn to innovate, problem solve, to build peace, and create new thinking on nation building. In short, inclusive educational institutions are the wealth of a nation. And that is why partnerships, enduring partnerships with educational institutions like Massey College is key. Next week, Columbia Law School's Journal on Transnational Law will host an event on the all tools approach, and we invite all of you to join. But we have to go beyond North America. How can other universities be part of this shared effort to advance the rights of women, women's education, and girls' education across the world? Can we call upon educational institutions in the world to come together to denounce the systemic violation of the rights of education in line with the CEDAW for Afghan women? In the 2020 Safe Schools Declaration, which acknowledged that schools and universities have been must be preserved as safe sites for education of both girls and boys, states from around the world signed on to the Safe School Declaration. Are we upholding that in Afghanistan? In 2021, countries around the world came together with Japan and Sierra Leone and with the Gambia and with other countries in the African countries, in the African continent to adopt Security Council Resolution 2021 to ensure education at all times, during a time of crisis, during a time of conflict, during a time of epidemic. Education is a non-derogable universal right. It is inalienable. And in 2020, the CEDAW was concerned, the committee was concerned about the disproportionately high rate of illiteracy among girls in Afghanistan. And I would like, in order to address some of the arguments that were made earlier in the morning, especially how the Sharia has been used as a way, instrumentalized, used, misused, and abused to as a way of providing credibility and legitimacy to the denial of girls' and women's education. And towards that end, I would like us to look at the ways in which other countries that are similarly situated, who adopt Sharia law, have adopted the primacy of education. Article 30 of the Basic Law on Saudi Kingdom enshrines not only the provision of public education for all citizens, but the country commits itself to the eradication of illiteracy that is enshrined in the Basic Law, the Supreme Law of Saudi Kingdom. In Egypt's new constitution of 2014, Article 19 not only speaks of the right to education, but also guarantees academic independence in Article 21. Moreover, it commits itself in Article 81 to the complete eradication of illiteracy of both men and women. In 2010, the Pakistan Constitution was amended to include that the state shall provide free and compulsory education to all children between the ages of 5 and 18. We heard about the rollback of multilateralism, but can we bypass the federal government in the United States to engage with states in the United States? And I say this because it is important for you to connect and build partnerships with businesses. It is important because when I look at the 1996 Burma law, which was a reaction to the long history of violence and severe human rights violations by the Burmese government, now Myanmar, my state, the state of Massachusetts, enacted the Burma law, restricting the procurement of goods or services and blacklisting US or foreign nationals doing business with then Burma, now Myanmar. So how do we finally, yes.
If you can hold on those thoughts, we'll ask a question from Rebecca, and then we can come back to you and continue this discussion. Rebecca, so Professor Rangita talked about the right to education as one of the rights that we could further study, and it's going to strengthen the case that is made against the de facto authorities under CEDAW. What other systemic violations of human rights in Afghanistan, what other types of denials of rights should be further analyzed, studied, so that the case against the authorities under CEDAW is further strengthened? And what kind of new partnerships do you think should be forged between different stakeholders to advance the case under CEDAW?
Thank you for that question. I first want to address your question about systemic discrimination. As you know, the law of discrimination has gone from a focus on individual discrimination to group discrimination, mostly based now on intersectional discrimination, and finally to systemic discrimination. Our understanding of systemic discrimination is very much work in progress, and that is the focus of my research and my teaching in my class. And I teach with Giselle Harras a class on discrimination, the nature of systemic discrimination against Afghan women. So with those preliminary comments about the nature of the law on discrimination and the importance of moving from individual to group to systemic discrimination, let me raise a few questions. So what makes discrimination systemic, and where do we look to for understanding the nature of systemic discrimination? We might start with the CEDAW inquiry procedure, which allows for inquiry reports where there's credible evidence that violations are systemic. And what are the kinds of questions we might ask to find the necessary information, evidence, and documentation on what makes discrimination systemic? One approach under CEDAW is whether the violations are persistent patterns of violations over time and across sectors. Where there's credible evidence to show that violations are persistent over time and across sectors, they will entertain an inquiry report. So when we think about this very important case that's being brought by Germany, Canada, the Netherlands, and Australia under Article 29 against Afghanistan, it will be successful in part because it's been able to make a very strong case of systemic discrimination. I stress this because the discussion this morning has emphasized over and over again about the institutionalized nature of the discrimination by the Taliban against Afghan women. So Rangita has very helpfully pointed out how we might develop partnerships in the education sector. I want to address how we might develop partnerships in the health sector. We will and probably we have already evidence showing that maternal mortality, preventable death in childbirth, and morbidities are on the rise in Afghanistan because of the lack of availability of maternity care. So what might be done in terms of partnerships? We have, as been explained this morning, very good groups in Afghanistan that have their eyes on the ground about what is actually happening. So partnerships with those groups, together with health organizations, both nationally, regionally, and internationally, to document these violations will be critical to the success of an Article 29 case. There are many organizations, even here in Canada, that are local affiliates of international organizations. The Canadian Society of Gynecology and Obstetrics has played a leadership role in the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics. And together, they have outlined guidelines for the prevention of maternal mortality. So partnerships in terms of finding violations of the right to health care under CEDAW's Article 12 will be critical, both horizontally and vertically. And there are groups in place that can work with Afghan women in Afghanistan and in the diaspora to document such violations. But they need to document them in a way that shows not just the deaths of women, but how they've been motivated by a systemic, intentional form of discrimination that has been institutionalized by the Taliban. So the challenge for us in these partnerships is to ensure that we document the institutionalized nature of these violations, whether in the educational sector, the health sector, the employment sector. And we need to show that they're persistent across sectors and over time. Now, this morning, discussion was had about UNESCO and its meeting next week. I'm wondering what is happening at the World Health Organization. I'm wondering what is happening in those health organizations, whether it's international nursing associations, international associations such as the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics, and the Médecins Sans Frontières that Principal Orbinsky is a member of. There are many collaborations here, partnerships that probably are in the making and could be solidified to documenting these violations. Now, within the systemic nature of these discrimination, what makes discrimination systemic? One needs also to look at the reinforcement mechanisms. Now, what do I mean by reinforcement mechanisms? Well, much has been spoken about the impunity, where there is a lack of accountability, where there is impunity for violations. That in and of itself is a reinforcement mechanism. So for every woman who dies in Afghanistan that death is not investigated, that is an form of impunity that must be called out and must be documented and shown how that is a reinforcement mechanism that leads to systemic discrimination. There are many other ways to think about what makes discrimination systemic, but I hope I've whetted your appetite in these questions. But I think we can find partnerships between groups working within Afghanistan, within the diaspora, within regional and international organizations in specific sectors, whether it's health, whether it's education, or whether employment, with ILO, for example.
Thanks so much. I think both the importance of education, the rights to education, rights to health or critical and kind of strengthen the case under CEDA. We'll have a very few minutes. We're going to take a quick round of questions from audience, and then we're going to wrap up the panel. We have, I don't know if the mics, colleagues from Massey College are not here. Let me, okay, we can get a question from there, and then we have one question here.
Hi, my name is Omar. Thank you for your insightful discussion. I am a student at Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy here. And also I lead a research hub at Monk School where we research about fragile states and displacement. My question refers more to academia, especially to Professor Rangita and other professors. Sorry, I forgot the name. So there are so many Afghans currently studying here at UFT and also other universities around Canada and other diaspora in other countries. How we can, as students studying in these universities, can use our research to influence policies domestically, whether it's in Canada or internationally, to support Afghan women in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one person here. Question.
Thank you. My name is Shaima Karimi. I have two questions. One of them is addressed Hadeia Amiry. As a young diplomat and policy expert who has advocated for Afghan women's rights in Afghanistan and advised in national security, and of course, you know, the culture and ethics work in Afghanistan, that majority of people in Afghanistan share the same idea as today's Taliban. What lesson can be learned from the past diplomatic efforts, and how can they apply to ensure Afghanistan women have a seat on the decision-making tables? Of course, like especially women in Afghanistan that they are protesting today. The second question is referred to all the panelists, how we can make Afghanistan as a priority in the global chaos. Thank you.
We'll take one question there, and then the final question here, and then I will let the panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Musa Zafar, a human rights activist. My question is also, I refer it to the academia more. I think both the academias refer to international laws, CEDA, the periodic review, Universal Periodic Review report, and the importance of documentation. But my question is more like, at a time when international organizations, including UN and its bodies like ICC, and their reputation is at stake due to one-man show in White House, is there anything promising in general for women, and particularly for women in Afghanistan? Thank you.
This last question here. I will take one.
Thank you again. My name is Ajman Ramir. So we were talking in the panels this morning and also today regarding the role of documentation and stories from on the ground. I think one thing which is really useful and can Massey College and some other institution in Canada and some other countries can take to play a role in having these discussions, because we still see less events, for example, that could amplify the voices, the stories, the arts, the struggles that the young women inside Afghanistan are facing. So I think a role of these institutions in terms of facilitating more fundings and also to play as a partner with the other organization can be really useful. And the other part that one thing I faced that was also mentioned by Ms. Yaftali, that not only with the woman, but also the lack of coordination between civil society organization in here in US, in Canada, and also in European countries can also raise more mistrust between those funder organizations. So I think there should be also more discussion on how to continue coordinating and facilitating partnership between these organizations. Thank you.
I think we have one final question.
Hello, everyone. Hello?
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, okay. My name is Silva Nasri, and I'm activist. My question is from Zarqa Yaftali. If she remember in 2018, a small group of women in Kabul started a campaign called "No to Harassment on Women, Safety and Security is the Right of Every Woman." This campaign is supported by all people in Afghanistan. At that time, no one knew who you were, but you took the credit for it if it was your own idea. Now you're doing the same by taking credit for the work of Afghan women like Tamana Pariani, Julia Parsi, Zarifa Yaqubi, and many others. My question is that when you will be retired so that a new generation with the new idea come and get a step. Thank you.
Thank you. We are, as usual, short on time. I think if all the panelists can react to the questions that they feel are most relevant to them, and also take a moment to share any concluding observations or remark they may have. If each colleague can take 1 to 1.5 minutes, I think that would be great. Hadeia, can we start with you maybe?
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Karimi, thank you very much for your question. You mentioned about two very important points. One, my experience on all the works of 20 years, and two, the lessons learned. My career pans on diplomatic issues mostly, and I'm just going to give you a very short example of my career and how this shaped us all, including, I'm sure, yourself and many other girls today that were in this room. In the past 20 years, every one of us, we enjoyed the democracy, and we're byproduct of that democracy. And unfortunately, after the 2021 and the takeover of Taliban, we're again in the ground zero, and we're again struggling to talk about that very basic fundamental issues that nowhere in the rest of the world they even talk about that. In terms of the past 20 years, how we worked to get up until August of 2021, which unfortunately, if we think that if Taliban will be gone tomorrow, and if we want to step back and start working in our country, it needs at least 2 to 3 decades to get in 2021. The lessons that we learned as a group and as a group of women, and eventually the people of Afghanistan, is not to trust others, is not to rely on others, because we saw that they left us when it pleased them. They left us when there was no more interest to use us, and we were just by ourselves. So let's rely on each other. Let's rely on everyone who is in this room, and also to trust each other and work on trust building, because we tried to do that so hard in past 20 years, working with an international community and addressing them and putting them on the other side of the table, while somehow we forgot about our own people. And once we did that, it really didn't bring us anywhere. So if we want to learn from that lessons, it's to really invest on ourselves, because this generation, that trust will get us somewhere. And at the end, I think one of the other issue I want to mention is the role that could play to bring the women of Afghanistan meaningfully back on the table comes from within Afghanistan. We will try so hard to do something here. We will try to be a voice for them, but it's them, it's those Afghan women who are inside that. But the reality is we're forgetting one point. We always talk about how we can work with the women of Afghanistan who are inside, how we can be a voice for them and with them. But then another important perspective is we're forgetting the men. The men in the Afghanistan, whether it's inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan, they play a huge role. And honestly, at this point, I call on men within Afghanistan and outside of Afghanistan to give a shoulder to the women of Afghanistan, step ahead and be a voice with us and work equally with us. I'm sure that that will bring a huge difference. And if we had that support from our men in the past 3-4 years, I'm sure we would have been in a different situation right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Dr. Rebecca and then Professor Rangita, and then last but not least, definitely Zarqa.
On the question about what can be done within the University of Toronto, within our own faculty, there is a working group of students, of law students, working on, they have a report on gender apartheid. And if you, maybe through Alicia Ginsberg, email me, I'd be glad to put you in touch with that group. But with like with any institution, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. But as students, you could put together perhaps a student group working on issues surrounding discrimination against Afghan women. In terms of the question about what can be done, let me just highlight what Rangita said about the 4-state party report for Afghanistan in June. I hope the CEDAW meeting is available through Zoom, and we need to highlight the report itself, the shadow reports, and the concluding observations. So for anybody, particularly students in the room who want to write up that report and the concluding observations of CEDAW, that would amplify many voices.
Thank you very much. Professor Rangita.
Thank you. I want to address the issue of education, and I want to address it through the twin pillars of both universities and businesses, because businesses depend on the pipeline of university-educated young women and men from Afghanistan and from around the world. And that was why I looked at the ways in which our new alliances need to be formed with businesses and universities. The International Federation of University Women, that's brought together by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, needs to be mobilized and needs to be galvanized, but that is still very much a Western-centric federation of university women. We need to reach out to Asian universities for women. There are many such universities, one in Malaysia and one in Bangladesh, where I taught a class of Afghan women students when I taught there as a Fulbright professor. I also wanted to address the ways in which we need to mobilize our attention around a standalone Women, Peace and Security resolution under the corpus of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, the 1325 Agenda, which now has 9 other Security Council resolutions. So I would ask you to join me in a shared effort towards an 11th Security Council resolution under the corpus of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which recognizes denial of women and girls' education as not only a crime against humanity, but as a threat to national and global security. So this is, and then finally, I wanted to leave with these words from Farida Shahid, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and currently the Special Rapporteur on Education, where she has reminded us that the universal right to equality is unqualified, in a way that the obligation to promote the rights to manifest religion or religious belief can be subject to limitations where necessary to protect the rights of others is not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Zarqa John, if you take 1 minute and summarize your concluding observations.
Thank you, Maiwand John, for the question that raised by one of my sister. As I mentioned in my remarks, that right now one of the good and positive points is the unity and solidarity among the new generation and also the senior leaders. So it is a good point, and the credit is going to all the new generation. But if we list to the work of those women activists that right now they are advocating for women's rights and their efforts as regarding to codifying of gender apartheid or women protection, women legal protection in Afghanistan, it will be a long list of those activists that they work for decades. And it will be a long list of those young generation that right now they are advocating for women's rights. But to be honest, if whenever we see any change in the situation of women in Afghanistan, if whenever we see any change in the viewpoints of world leaders about Afghanistan and the behavior of decision makers about Afghanistan, the credit will be go to those women that they raised their voice during the past 3.5 years in the street of Kabul and other provinces of Afghanistan. Those women that they detained, they arrested, they tortured in the presence of the Taliban, and still they are advocating for women's rights. Still they are going to continue their advocacy without any fear or without any scare from the situation that they were the witness.
Thank you so much. And that concludes our panel today. I'm not going to attempt to summarize anything. Just one point that Rangita said, we need to now push boundaries to construct partnership with a focus on bringing the global south into more and more into the picture. And for Canada, I think it's a moment of an opportunity for Canada to sort of step up their efforts and rise to the occasion and stand up for women's rights in Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahyab, for moderating this remarkable panel, yet another very rich discussion, thanks to our panelists, both online and in person. So we are now, I'm going to remind the online audience to join us for panel 4 in about 10-15 minutes after a quick changeover to the next panel. And you can use the same playlist link found on the Massey calendar to access the online stream. I think that puts an end to our live stream. You have something to?
So just find it if you'd like to speak with me directly, you don't have to go through Rebecca and everyone.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. There's an excellent group at the law school and one of the mafia members here, which is very good, a good mafia. We are going to take a 10-minute transition to change to the next panel. So please come back promptly in 10 minutes. And following panel 4, we will have quick closing remarks. And then we will head to the upper library once again for a quick networking session and refreshments. And I'm told that we must evacuate the room by 4 p.m. So we're going to stop very sharply at 4 p.m. So see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.